Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ash here coming at you today in Clash Royale with a video that I think you guys are really going to enjoy. It is a double Night Witch deck starring first time pro. He is the Nova Pro Team manager. He is Q.W.G, and I'm so happy to have him on the channel. You can see his profile right now. Very impressive. He is a perennial top 200 player on his pushing account, which you can see is also in our clan. Now guys, Q.W.G messaged me and he said, Ash, I have a deck that's going to look like it's gimmicky. It has Night Witch and Electro Wiz. So it's heavy on the legendaries, it's heavy on the epics, but it's not a gimmick deck. It's not an off-meta, fun, silly deck. It is actually super effective. In Q.W.G's opinion, it is the strongest. Actually, let me quote him. This is the undeniable best Night Witch deck, Ash. PPP resurrected as the new giant double witch deck. So basically PPP was the P.E.K.K.A. Prince Dark Prince deck that was so popular over a year ago now, and now you have that same sort of a feel with this deck. The Night Witch and the Witch behind the giant is almost an unstoppable push, especially because you have Log and Lightning in this deck. Now we're going to talk about its obvious weaknesses, mainly Executioner and Lightning, and how we're going to deal with them, because we do have a game plan. Now before we get too deep into the deck review and talking about the replays and all that good stuff, I did get a few messages the other day. This is kind of a deep subject, and I don't really like to talk about deep, dark subjects on the channel. This is, after all, a game, and it should be light and fun and informative at the same time. At least that's what I'm going for on these videos. But I have been getting a few comments recently of people who are depressed and just anxious and upset about the world that we live in. Man, what a dark, deep, heavy subject to cover in the middle of a deck review, Ash. But I did want to address that in this video a little bit. And you know, I don't have any magic solutions, and I'm not going to talk about specific attacks or anything. There's always, when you look at the news, there's always bad news that you can focus on, and if you're not careful, eventually it just becomes overwhelming, and you start to see all the bad news out there in the world, and you start to forget that there's millions of good acts and good stories and good things happening every single day around the entire world. So I just wanted to remind you guys that those of you who are depressed and sad about the events going on, there's nothing wrong with that at all. But I would advise you guys to think and remember that bad things have always happened since the beginning of history. In fact, it's getting better and better as we go on. However, the news coverage and media coverage has been getting more and more intense and more 24/7. And let's face it, bad news gets clicks. Bad news gets more eyeballs on the television screen. So just always be aware that there's a lot of good things to be happy about in the world. So I'll get off my soapbox now and I'll get into this deck review, but I did just kind of want to touch base with you guys. And I know not everybody needs the little pep talk, but you know, even me, myself, sometimes it's good for me to say these things out loud, because even I can get depressed and anxious about world events going on outside our control. So anyway, let's bring some levity back into the video, guys, and we'll talk about Q.W.G's deck. So let's just take a look at the deck here. It's a rather expensive deck. That's why the Elixir pump is going to be an extremely valuable card in this deck. This is one of those decks, and we've talked about these in other deck reviews. This is one of those decks that the mantra for you guys is going to be pump, 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 okay? Especially in the first 2 minutes, you really want to set yourself up for a real nice Elixir advantage. Now, Q.W.G said it's not always, Q.W.G said it's not always going to be possible inside these matches. Some people will be super aggressive and not allow you to pump, and some people will just continually lightning or rocket your pumps. So you're still able to win with this deck if the opponent is immediately taking out your pumps. We're going to talk about why apply as well. But with that situation kind of step aside, that your opponent's super aggressive or they're always attacking your pumps, you're going to want to pump a lot. So more than setting up another big beatdown push with a giant in the back in the first 2 minutes, Q.W.G would much rather you go ahead and just pump up, get 2 pumps, get 3 pumps on the board, and you're going to be looking really, really good going into double elixir time. So pumping aside, we just talked about this. The number 2 things that or the 2 top things that you're going to be worrying about in this deck is Lightning and Executioner. So let's talk about Executioner first. Executioner is really powerful against both the Witch and the Night Witch. I mean, imagine you have your ideal push going. You have your Giant, your Witch, your Night Witch. Hey, let's throw in an E-Wiz for the heck of it, okay? And then your opponent Tornado Executioners that's not good at all. That's a huge value for them. So your number 1 concern in this deck is going to be, does my opponent have Executioner, and how am I going to get rid of it? So you'll see throughout these replays that we actually have a game plan for that. Q.W.G has included the Lightning in this deck, and that is basically the main purpose for the Lightning. Obviously, sure, resetting to, Inferno Towers is absolutely great, but Inferno Towers don't pose as great of a threat as you might think. You have E-Wiz to reset Inferno Towers, you have Night Witch who spawns bats, and of course you have Witch who spawns skeletons, okay? So the main usage for Lightning is going to be saving it for Executioner every single time. Even if you have to Executioner log to take out an a Lightning log, man, I'm having trouble speaking today, Ash. See what happens when I get deep? I get thrown off my game, guys. But seriously, use Lightning and log against Executioner. Treat the Executioner as a huge threat. When you see Executioner, you know you need a game plan. So that's going to be first in your mind. Second in your mind with this deck is obviously probably the first thing that you guys thought of when you saw this deck initially, right? How am I going to play E-Wiz, Witch, and Night Witch and not get absolutely decimated by Lightning? Well, the good thing about this deck is you do have the pumps, right? So there's a lot of Lightning targets for your opponent. And coincidentally, we made sure we shared replays going against a lot of Lightning. I think almost all of these replays, maybe besides 1 or 2, is going to have Lightning in them. So you're going to see how basically Q.W.G is able to work around the Lightning in the opponent's deck. You can use your Elixir Pump as bait, and then you can kind of craftfully and artfully drop 1 Witch at a time or 1 E-Wiz behind your tank. And basically what you want to do is give the opponent the opportunity to use that Lightning against your troops, but use the Lightning before you have your main push on the board, on the arena. Now, remember that the Night Witch versus Lightning isn't that bad. So dropping a Night Witch behind a Giant, for example, and your opponent uses a Lightning against you, I mean, that's kind of a win, especially in this deck for you as the Night Witch Giant user, because that Lightning is just going to make 6 bats for you guys, 4 upon her death and 2 when she spawns them initially. So 6 bats behind a Giant for 6 elixir of your opponent is actually really good, and that gives you the opportunity to then drop your Witch or then drop your E-Wiz, and then you have 6 bats, a Giant, and a Witch, or 6 bats, a Giant, and an E-Wiz coming down the lane with no Lightning left. So essentially you have a big job here is to separate your units properly. Now that's important in any deck where you have Lightning targets. You don't want to give out great Lightning value, but that should always be, you know, center and foremost in your mind with this deck, okay? Make sure you're separating your units. You don't want to play a Witch and then an E-Wiz right next to her. No way, that's not going to work out for you. So if you know your opponent has Lightning or even Fireball, you want to make sure you distance your troops appropriately. Not only distance, but also add separation time-wise when you're dropping your troops. Wait for your opponent to drop more troops or commit more elixir to a push before you drop all your defenses at once. That way you're mitigating the power that they're going to have with Lightning, and if they do have Lightning, well, they're going to be out of elixir because eventually they're going to have to drop something behind their tank. So that's how you're going to deal with Lightning. Now, And the start of these matches using the double witch deck, you basically want to play a passive game at the start. Again, Q.W.G. Why do I keep calling Q.V.G? Q.W.G. says it's so important to just focus on just gaining an elixir advantage and playing defense. Now you're gonna take some damage with this deck. It's not an incredibly defensively strong deck. You do have some options. You have E-Wiz, you have skeletons. E-Wiz plus skeletons is really strong. You can use your lightning on defense, or you can use a preemptive lightning against that executioner that's dropped way on your opponent's side of the arena as kind of preemptive defense, and also taking out the biggest enemy to you in your deck in the executioner. So this preemptive defense, the witch is pretty good, especially against graveyard. Graveyard's everywhere, and the witch had already kind of poked her head into the meta here and there, but she never really entered into any tier 1 decks. Now that we have the Night Witch added into a witch deck, again, according to the Nova Pro Team Manager, not Ash, don't take my word for it, guys, but he says finally the actual witch is viable for the first time in really any time on tier 1 gameplay. Is it really going to happen? Are other pros going to pick up the witch? Time will tell there, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know, but I do know that this guy has some major credibility. Again, always in the top 100 global, and just a really good player, picking up 12 win after 12 win with this deck on its very first run, very first time picking up this deck or formulating this deck. He went 12-0 in a grand challenge, not one loss. So, you know, you can't blame him for being really excited about the deck. So the E-Wiz is obviously your #1 defensive weapon, along with skeletons. As we were getting back to my point about defense, you have your Night Witch, which is great on defense. You guys who have unlocked the Night Witch so far probably already know how powerful she can be against some melee units, especially like the Knight, like the Golem, like the Giant. So really, really effective defensively in the right situation is the Night Witch. She's just so powerful. Now the last thing before we concentrate on these matches, I do want to do some just play-by-play here. You can see going up against Golem Lightning, always a good deck to kind of learn how to handle here. We're going to be pushing the opposite lane, but look at this, a huge commitment to this left lane. It's a Golem, a Night Witch, and a Mega Minion incoming in the left. So we're going to play defense here using our Witch on the Golem, using the Night Witch on the other Night Witch and the Mega Minion. We kill the other Night Witch first with our bats here, or excuse me, our Night Witch dies first, then the bats are able to finish off the supporting troops behind that Golem. Meanwhile, we get some damage to the right lane. That could have been a devastating, even a 3-crown push there, a Golem, a Mega Minion, and a Night Witch, but we were able to defend and really mitigate what could have been a devastating push. So here now, we've done a little bit of damage to the right. We know he's probably going to pump up. He does. We decide to pump up again. Look at where he put his pump, guys, right in front of his King Tower. He's trying to basically give up a little bit of a bait there, a little bit of a lightning bait, saying, hey, you want to use the lightning against my pump and do some damage against my left tower? All yours if you want to. However, the opponent doesn't bite. Easy does not bite against that lightning bait. So once he drops the Golem there, it's very important with this deck, if you're going up against a heavier beatdown deck, specifically Golem decks or Lava Hound decks, you're going to want to push the opposite lane. That is definitely going to be a very, very viable situation for you guys. And check this out. Takes down that right tower. An ill-advised lightning used by the opponent there takes out the Witch, but essentially spawns 6 bats, and the 6 bats with the Giant end up taking down that tower. So meanwhile, the opponent's probably going to take down our left tower here with that Golem reaching the tower again, but look at this counter push, and this is really what this deck is all about. So the opponent at this point has lightning in hand. It would probably behoove the opponent to use a lightning right now and not a Golem, but they use a Golem, and now we're going to make them pay. Taking down the left tower really, really rapidly is a Night Witch, 2 Electro Wizards, and a Witch, and even though the Night Witch is dead and so is one of the E-Wizzes, look at how fast this King Tower is going to go down here. A big mistake dropping that Golem by his opponent, and we're going to make them pay, punishing them with that pretty good counter push. Remember, those E-Wizzes and the Night Witch and the Witch were all from the defensive round prior to that exchange where the Golem came in the left lane. So very, very good job there. Now we're going to go against one of these new meta Expo decks here. Interesting deck on the bottom. It has Inferno Tower, it has Dark Goblin, Goblin Gang, and of course Expo. So we're going to see how we deal with a very popular version of Expo using this deck. So again, guys, we are pumping early, we are pumping often. One last thing that I should have told you during the deck review portion of this video is you always want to identify early on what targets you can log in your opponent's deck, whether it be Goblin Gang or Ice Spirit, Skeletons, etc., and of course Skarmy as well. And what you want to do is start using predictive logs towards the end of the match, because swarm units, Goblin Gang again, Skarmy again, can really do a number on this deck. So pretty good defense there against that first Expo. We used the Giant to distract as we used the Witch kind of as backup, and it allowed us to get another pump on the board here. So we actually do have a decent Elixir advantage, at least in our investment via the pumps. Here comes a Fireball. That's good Fireball bait. We now know that the opponent has no direct damage in hand. We're going to build up a pretty good push here in the left, starting with a Night Witch, making sure we place her away from the Elixir pump. Don't want to give any incidental value. You never know exactly what the opponent might have in deck. So that was a good Inferno Tower placement there, forcing us basically to use the Lightning to reset it. So it was a good Lightning as well. Now, had they used the Inferno Tower up closer to the river there, we could have dropped the E-Wiz instead, and the E-Wiz would have targeted onto that Inferno Tower. But you can see either way, you can't complain with those results, guys. Check out all the damage done to that left tower, 789 HP left. So we are in the lead at this point pretty comfortably, if I might add. So at this point, with a minute 10 left, we're going to go ahead and pump again. The rule to pumping when you're getting close to overtime or close to the last minute, excuse me, of the match is going to be, if you're in the lead, you pump. If you're not in the lead, you don't pump. So that's basically what most of the pros have told me, and this advice that I've taken to heart and I've applied to my gameplay. So again, if you're in the damage lead, I'll go ahead and pump. If I'm not, I will not pump into the last minute of a match or overtime. So here we go again. There are probably exceptions to that rule, by the way. For example, if you're playing against another, if you're playing Three Musketeer against another Three Musketeer deck and you know they have no direct damage, well, then I might pump if it's pretty close, if I don't have a huge lead, like a tower lead against my opponent. So finally, getting that Expo to connect there, it's interesting we chose not to use the Lightning there. Instead, we're going to save the Lightning, and now we use the E-Wiz against that Inferno Tower. We just talked about this. If the Inferno Tower is planted up towards the river, we will use the E-Wiz as backup, and you can see here we're able to take down that left tower with only 3 seconds to go. A frustrated Fireball comes in from the opponent, but that is going to be all she wrote, guys. Another victory here with the Double Witch Giant deck. So guys, I wish you the best of luck with these Double Witch deck. Double Witch deck was something I had kept an eye out for a long time to see if it was going to kind of enter into the meta, and wouldn't you know, we finally have one to share with you guys. So guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video. A huge shout out to first time pro, the Nova team manager, none other than Q.W.G. Got it right that time, no V. Don't call me Q.W.G, Q.W.G. So guys, huge shout out to my YouTube partner, Bren Chong. You can find his information in the description below. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, take care, guys.